Welcome everybody to our webinar series where every week we talk about e-learning trends, share iSpring tips and tricks, and cover clients' cases. My name is Paulina. I'm the community manager at iSpring, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar, where we will be talking about graphic design in e-learning. We will cover some common mistakes and show you how to avoid them. We are going to have an interesting format of this webinar and I hope you folks will enjoy it very much. Okay, and as a presenter, I have invited my colleague, tech geek and iSpring genius, Arina Vass. Hi, Arina. How are you doing today?
Hi, Paulina. I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing great as well. Thanks a lot for asking.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Irina. I'm the technical support engineer at iSpring, and I will be presenting for you today. So, did you know that it's possible to build eye-catching and effective training courses, even if you don't have a designer on your team? In today's webinar, we will learn how you can easily enhance your existing materials by applying the basics of graphic design. So we will be happy to share practical tips and tricks that will allow you to create outstanding and functional e-learning courses that your students will enjoy. So at our today's webinar, we will present the basic principles of graphic design, show how to apply them to e-learning courses, point out common mistakes in online course design, and also see how to improve an actual course to make it look perfect. We will improve an actual course on fire safety slide by slide together. So first we will show you the course. Then we will point out the mistakes on the slide. We will see how we can fix these mistakes. And finally, we will show you the results. So let's move on and go to our first rule. And we will talk about composition now. So the first principle of graphic design we will look at today is composition. In a good online course, information and design complement each other and help to achieve learning goals. Information on the slide and visual elements work as a single mechanism. They attract and hold the student's attention and help the person remember the information better. When all the elements on the slides look harmonious, they form a composition. And how do you achieve this perfect balance? Let's look at some practical tips. So the first rule in composition section will be using a widescreen slide size. So in PowerPoint, there are two formats. The first one is 4:3 and the second one is 16:9. 4:3 is a square slide format. It's an old format that was used to show presentations with a video projector. And 16:9 is a rectangular format. It's used for modern laptops and smartphones. So let's look at our first example here. So this is our first slide, and before I tell you about the mistakes on this slide, I would like to ask you, so what do you think? What is wrong on this slide? Please submit your suggestions in the chat on the GoToWebinar panel. I'm very excited to see what you think about this.
It's too much white space, narrow, doesn't seem to fit screen. 4:3 format, yep. Too much white space, yep. Thank you very much for submitting your answers.
Perfect. Actually, Paulina, thank you so much for reading the answers in chat. And actually, you are all correct. And now let's just talk about that. So first, we have extra spaces on the left and on the right. They distract users from important information in the middle because they are too bright compared to the middle part. So now we also have less space for the elements in the middle. And as a result, we have to place buttons and text too close to each other, and it's causing visual overload. As you can see here, we have an image, and next to this image, there is a text, and the course button looks too big. And let's see how we can improve it. So here we simply rescaled it to widescreen. So we selected 16 by 9 format. And now it's much easier for a user to pay attention to important information. So we no longer have these distracting elements, and the background looks much more immersive. For me, as a student, that would be much more interesting to look at the slide like this than with these white spaces. So that's it about the slide size and the format of the slide. Let's move on to the next rule. And the next rule is called the rule of thirds. So the rule of thirds is based on the perception of the human eye. This means that the image should be imagined as being divided into 9 equal parts by 2 equally spaced horizontal lines and 2 equally spaced vertical lines. You can see the example on this slide here. And important compositional elements should be placed along these lines or on their intersections. Let's look at our example. So on this slide, the rule of thirds has not been followed. We have the text too close to the left edge, and it is forcing the viewer to search where the text begins. You can actually try it yourself. Just start reading, and you will notice that you have to look to the left edge, and it's not very comfortable. So the image is too far to the right. And as a result, we have a large gap between text and image. And it makes it necessary for the student to look at the image for a couple of seconds, which is actually a lot of time when we are reading. And here is how we can fix it. So first, we will need to divide the slide into 9 parts according to the rule of thirds. So we need to draw 2 equally spaced horizontal and 2 equally spaced vertical lines, just like we have on the example. So now we can clearly see that the text and image are in the wrong places. Now let's move text and images to the correct position. So it looks better already. So now let's remove these lines and see the final output. Text and image are now closer to each other, and we don't have distracting empty space between them. It's very easy for the student to start reading and also look at the image. So that was the rule of thirds, and now let's move on to the next rule. And next rule is to observe the hierarchy of elements. The essence of this method is to draw attention to a particular element through contrast, such as fonts, size, shapes, location, and color. It's very important because the largest and brightest objects attract the most attention. You will need to make sure that only the most important elements are highlighted on the slide. Let's look at the example. So the most important element on the slide is always a heading. On our slide, we have 2 headings, and they are almost the same size as the text in the description. So it's very hard for a student to find the heading and start reading. So the next issue on this slide is the information itself. We have 2 key points on this slide. So in the top part, we have the outline of the course, and at the bottom, we have the description of our tutor who will help us during the course. And it's actually very hard for a student to decide which part is more important. How can we fix it? First, we will need to put the outline and information about the tutor on two different slides. So this is our new slide with the outline. When we have only one block with important information, we need to make the heading larger. So as you can see, now we have the large and bright heading, and we have smaller text in the description. Also, we need to create more contrast between background and text by adding a dark background and white shape under the text. So now we are directing our student to the outline of the course, and we have a bright heading. And so now it's very easy for the student to read what this slide about and then read the outline of the course. It will so placing the elements on the slide in the logical order will ensure that users perceive the information and remember it better. So I hope it's clear about the hierarchy of the elements, and we can move to the next. We can move on to the next rule. And this rule is adding air to the slide. So it means that you mustn't put icons and text close to each other. So they say that design needs to breathe. The rule is that 20% of the slide must be blank. So here is our before slide. As you can see on this slide, the elements fill the whole slide area, and the text is too close to the left. And also it's quite long. So there is a chance that students will never read everything we have here. So next we have an image that is used to complement the material. And it does not have to take so much space here. So actually, I'd like to ask you here. So can you give any tips on how can we improve this slide? So please write in the chat, what do you think we can do to make this slide look better? So let me give you just a minute to do this. Paulina, can you please help us to read some answers in the chat? That would be great.
Sure, sure. So some of the answers are to use bullets as an option, move graphic and text closer together, possibly decrease the picture size. Yeah, make the image smaller. Awesome. Less text. Yeah, reduce type. More air. Crop the picture. Yeah, thank you very much. Awesome, awesome tips. Smaller picture. Everybody's craving for smaller picture, Arena.
So let's see if we need to do this. So let's move on to the slide with our corrections. So actually, as you can see, you were all right. And the tips that you provided in chat were 100% correct. So on this slide, we have a topic of the chapter or in the course. So this chapter is called Flammable Substances. And this is the most important information on the slide. We don't need so much text. Just a short description will work fine here. So it's very important to work with the text and shorten it, leaving only key points. So next we need to make the image smaller, of course, and also move all elements to the center. As you can see, it looks much better now. So let's just quickly go back and look at the final slide. So I think this one is much better than the previous one. And actually, that was the last rule of composition, which was called adding air to the slide. We will move on to the next part of our webinar, to the second part, where we will talk about typography, which is another principle of composition. Typography is another principle of graphic design, and it's a technique of arranging text elements to make written language readable and appealing when displayed. And let's look at our first rule here. So the first rule is to use no more than 2 different fonts on the slide. There can be up to 2 fonts in the course, one for the heading and another for the text body. Uh, On this slide, let's look at our example. On this slide, we can see 4 different fonts. As I believe you noticed that it does not look very neat. And also this font here, it does not go along with the topic of the course. I mean this font which is right under the heading. So this course is on a very serious topic of fire safety. And the font is too curvy and fun for the topic of this course. And now what can we do? So first, we will need to decrease the number of fonts to 2. I selected one font for the headings and another one for the body of the text. So if you're using subheadings, it's better to choose the same font as the body text, but you can make it larger or bold. And another important rule is to make sure that fonts are easy to read. So here I selected a simple and readable font for my description. So let's quickly look at the beginning. And now let's see how we fixed it. It looks much better now and it's very easy to read the information. So that's it about the number of fonts on the slide, and let's move on to the next rule. And the next rule is adding contrast to the text. People in general very rarely read the text from beginning to the end. So we always look at the heading first, and then if the heading is catchy, we study the material in more detail. And let's look at our examples. So when users study new material, they put a lot of effort into understanding and remembering the topic. And it's a very difficult task on its own. So on this slide, in my example, the background is too dark and the text is visible, but very hard to read. So this is building additional obstacles for students. And our task as course designers is to make sure that students don't have to exert a lot of energy to find and read the information on the slide. And let's see how that can be done. We improved this slide by simply adding contrast to the text and background. The easiest way to create contrast is to use dark text on a light background, just as we have here. So it's very simple, but it makes the life of our learners much easier. And so that was about the contrast. And now let's speak about the next rule. And this rule is called proximity of objects. So the main goal of the proximity rule is to group information logically. So it becomes clear where each element belongs. When objects are next to each other, they are perceived as a whole. So let's look at our example. On this slide, a man and the word bubble are too far away from each other. And as a result, they are visually disconnected. Another issue we have here is that spacing between lines is too big. The text is not perceived as an extract. I'm speaking about the text in the word bubble. So here is how we can fix it. On this slide, we moved the word bubble and the picture of a man closer to each other. And now it's very clear that he's saying these words. And next, we decreased the spacing between lines. And now it looks like a whole. It's much easier to read and easier to understand that the word bubble belongs to this man. All right, so that was the rule, which is that was the proximity of objects. And let's move on to the next rule. And the next rule is to avoid visual overload. Let's go straight to our example. So sometimes when we have a lot of information, it's hard to decide which part is the most important. If we highlight all elements, we will end up with nothing highlighted. The same exactly as we have on this slide. And here we have too many attributes applied to the text. The text is bold, it's italic, and also underlined. The element on the slide becomes very heavy visually. And I also have another very important tip. Underlined text usually indicates a hyperlink, so it's better not to use it on a plain text at all. Most students will want to click on it to open a link. So now let's look at how we fix the slide. Here we simply deleted unnecessary text attributes and now it looks cleaner. We don't have to highlight quiz answers because they are already indicated by the radio buttons. And so that was the rule so where we need to avoid visual overload, and we can move on to the last but not least rule for today. And it is using left alignment for the text. Let's look at some examples. So on this slide, the text is centered. When we center the large paragraph, lines begin in different places and it slows reading speed greatly. So let's just do a quick test. So please try to read this text and decide if it's hard for you to read it. So of course you can read it, but just comparing to the normal text, which is aligned to the left. So as for me, I've tried to read it, but my eyes got tired on the line number 3. And imagine if you have even longer extract than we have here. So now let's go to the next slide. And here we have the text aligned to the width. So it's easier to read than the center text, but here you will see that additional gaps appear between words. The thing is that a gap means a stop, and these gaps are causing a student to interrupt reading where it's not intended. So now please try to read the text when you know that, and notice how you stop for a second in the places where the gaps are. All right, so that's it. And now let's move on to the next slide here. Just a second. Okay, and this is the text aligned to the left. So now please try to read the text aligned to the left, and you will see that it's much easier and much comfortable for you. It will be much more comfortable for you to read it. So, and now let's quickly look at our previous slides. So this was the text aligned to the left. This one was with the gaps, and this one is centered. So now when we compare that, the alignment to the left looks the best. So we are done, and we covered all the tips that we prepared for you today. Let's just sum up what we've learned and make up a recipe for perfect e-learning course design. So we have two principles. They are composition and typography. And in composition, you will need to make sure that you are using widescreen slide size, then following the rule of thirds. Observe the hierarchy of elements, and of course add air to the slide. In typography, you will need to make sure that you are using 2 fonts only, that you add contrast to the text and to the background. Check proximity of the objects to make sure that the elements that belong to one group are close to each other and it's not confusing for a student to understand where the element belong. Then avoid visual overload, of course, and align text to the left. So this is a recipe for a good course, and I hope that these tips and rules will help you to improve your e-learning courses and provide better experience for your students. And that was it. Now we can move on to the Q&A session. Paulina, can you please help us?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Okay, so Dawn is asking, what do you think of design suggestions from PowerPoint?
Well, so let me just close this presentation. I believe I'll just open the PowerPoint window here. Just a second. Mhm. So let's move it here. So in PowerPoint, you have, so there are some slide ideas, and actually you can use them. I think they are great, but also, so I would like to tell you about one thing, so that we have in our product. So in our iSpring Suite authoring tool, we have the content library with slide templates. So if you have iSpring tool, or if you're planning to purchase it or evaluating it, so in our content library, you can find a lot of slide templates that were created by our designers, and you can use them as slide templates. And of course, PowerPoint like designs are good too, but here you will have unusual slides compared like more unusual slide types than in PowerPoint. But that's fine. PowerPoint is very helpful to create slide design. At least you don't have to add images to every slide when you're working. If we speak about the content library in iSpring Suite, so here you will have several sections. There are slide templates, characters, and also background objects and icons. So let me just demonstrate how you can add the slide template. You just need to double click it, and it will add a slide to your presentation. So this is a beautiful slide with the space theme, and you can just replace the text in this so in these text boxes, you can change images if you want, and your course will look great with no effort. Also in Content Library, there is characters part. So here you can find a lot of images of people, so of different age, different nationality, different professions. So you can find a lot of pictures that you can use in your courses to make them more personal and to make them more interesting for students. And in background subjects and icons, there are some images that you can also use in your, so on your slides. Here you can find super high quality pictures. For example, some images of meeting rooms or hospitals or some classrooms, and they can be used to create your courses. And here you can also find some objects such as for example, computers. You can find some mobile phones and all these things. So these are not mobile phones and all the things you can use in your courses. And the great thing is that if you have content library in your license, all of these images will be copyright free for you. So you won't have to worry about searching for the, so you won't have to search for the images online and um, so and check if you can use them in your courses and if you don't break some copyright law.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope it's helpful and it demonstrates how so the content library we have in our tool.
Thank you so much. Yeah, let's cover some of the questions. There was a question if there is any recommendation about how many words or sentences should be included in one slide. And here's the goal to fit one key point on one slide. What about use of color in the text for emphasis or headings? So here you should be very careful, and it's better to emphasize what you want with bold, for example, but don't make it colorful. Let's keep it simple so that it's easier on our eyes to read this text.
Yeah, Paulina, sorry for interrupting you. So I have some tip here. So when you're using a color, the color should be meaningful. For example, when you have some slide where it says what is right and what is wrong, you can use green and red color because they are perceived as a user as like a color of danger and the color of something good. So in this case, you can use green and red, for example, in the heading, but please be careful about using different colors because they may
Mhm.
just confuse the user, the
Yeah,
student, I mean.
yeah. Exactly. Again, there was a question about if we can recommend any good fonts for presentations. So here is, and that was one of the most popular questions. So thank you very much for submitting that. And the answer here would be Roboto, OpenSense, and Railway. And let me actually paste this in the chat box, okay? Now let's move on.
Actually, Paulina,
Hmm.
sorry, stopping you again. Actually,
Go ahead.
I'd like to show you a resource. So sorry, I believe this is not the one.
Hmm.
So if you go to Google Fonts, uh, you can actually test how your font will look with the text. And you can, so here you can check how the font will look together. So I think the Google Fonts is the good resource. And in general, if you just Google like font pairs, you will be able to find a lot of great um, font pairs that you can use. So even if you go to images, you will see in examples like this one, where you can find a good like good fonts for the heading and good fonts for text body. It's called font pairs. So if you want to find more, you can definitely go and check it here.
Thank you very much, Arena, for sharing. Did you also pass it, sorry, pasted it in the chat?
No, I haven't done this, but I will type it in chat right now.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And also going back to the question about recommendation about how many words or sentences should be included on the slide, um, a couple of people said 7 words is the ideal text limit, no more than 30% of text per page. So you can follow that as well. Thank you guys for sharing. Okay, let's see if there were any other questions. Arena, you know that there's a built-in grid in PowerPoint. Could you please show where you can turn it on for, I mean, for the slide alignment? Please,
It should be
please,
here.
yeah,
Yeah,
say where you were
these.
going.
So it's so I just need to remember where it is. So you will need to go to View tab, and in View tab in PowerPoint, you will find different helpful things that will allow you to build a good course. So and here you can you can enable guides where or grid lines that can be used to place elements in the right order. So for example, when I enable the grid line, I can see that the rule of thirds, if I follow the rule of thirds, it will be this line, I believe this line, and like these two. So you can use it
Hmm.
to when you are placing the element. So of course you don't have to enable that and look at this grid all the time, but just to check that you placed elements correctly, you can enable it and use it.
And there were a lot of questions about if it's like how to test if the slide is going to be if the slide is going to look good on different devices like smartphones or tablets. And here is the biggest advice would be to test yourself. So test on all devices and just looking if you are liking it, if it's easier for you to digest the content. And also, speaking of the tools, most of them nowadays allow for preview of how your slides are gonna look on different devices, including iSpring of course. So the text is going to be adaptable to the screen size. So it should look good on the devices that your learners are going to use. But for this particular webinar, we were discussing the desktop version in more detail, just so you understand this.
Mhm. Yes, and actually, if you do use iSpring tool, if you run preview in iSpring, let me just quickly show how it works. So if you run preview in iSpring, you will have an option to switch between switch between devices at the top. So if you click on the mobile phone, you will see how the slide is presented on the mobile device.
Mm-hmm.
And in iSpring, actually courses created with iSpring, they are fully compatible with mobile phones, and we have special player for viewing on mobile, and slides look good if you publish them with iSpring to SCORM format or to our LMS.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you very much. And somebody was asking what visual content would look best in the presentation. So let's always think about our audience who will be viewing this presentation, because if we are thinking about somebody grown up, then we should probably better use real pictures or graphics. If we are talking about kids or younger audience, maybe some cartoon or animated characters would work best in this case. And another question was about centering the heading. So yes, you can center the heading when underneath the heading there is a like the main text and it's not more than 2 lines. So because in this case, it should be centered as well. And you remember we were viewing the centered text, like the full paragraph is really hard to read, so please try to follow this rule.
So I've just found one question that was repeated several times
Uh-huh.
in the chat. It is
Hmm.
about changing the slide size format. So I will quickly show you where you need to change it. So you will need to go to design, and here you will find slide size. So if you can select standard one or widescreen one. So but please be careful about that, because if you create all slides in standard and then switch them to widescreen, the content you placed on the slide will not change its place and you will have to redo that. So if you start working on the presentation, please keep in mind which format you need, set up the correct format, and only after that place your elements on the slides. So this is very important, because if I change this slide size now, that will look not, so that won't look correct. It will be moved. So just
Hmm.
one more time, slide size is in design, slide size here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Perfect. And there is one more question. Can you mix pictures of real things, nature faces, etc., along with cartoon graphics, or should you choose one or the other? So if you want to mix, in this case, you probably need to approach or ask for help from a professional designer. But in general, it's better to use either or. So to stay to keep your PowerPoint presentation in one style, sort of. And one more question, and that's it. Is it recommended to use the same fonts throughout the presentation? And that's very important. The answer is yes, for sure. Please try to use one font throughout the presentation. That will unite your slides and put them together and be very easy to digest by your learner, because that's the most important, that's our goal for the content that we create to be easy to digest by our learners and for their retention to go only up, right? Okay, so Arena, any other questions you wanted to cover?
So I think that's it. I believe we covered most of the questions.
Most. Yeah.
Yeah, but if we did not cover your question, so you're always welcome to send us an email to support@ispring.com. So here we have the link to
Mhm.
our website. And if you go to our website, I will share it in chat. So I've just shared it in chat, and if you click on support, you will see our email address. Oh yes, so Polina, thank you so much. And you can submit your questions if you have any questions regarding our tool or you need some tips, we will be happy to help you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. So we hope that this webinar was useful to you folks and you are leaving armed with another great tips on how you can make your content look better and deliver greater content to your learners. And at this point, I'm ready to wrap up our presentation. All right, so I hope everyone has an amazing day, and I will see you at the next webinar. So, bye, everybody. Bye, Arena. Thank you very much.
Goodbye, everyone. Have a wonderful day and build great courses.
Right. Okay, bye bye, guys.